I'm Susan from Sunrise Quilt Studio, and in today's video I'm working on two more blocks in the Broken Star quilt. And this first block here is the Maple Star block, and I'm using the variegated thread of by Signature called Fad. It's got multiple colors in it, and they're really bright, so I felt they went well with the bright fabrics within this quilt. And the feather that I'm doing is one that I did in a previous block, and it's one where all the feathers come together at a single point in the center of the block. The machine is on stitch regulated mode, and that just helps me get the feel for the feather, and I can kind of take my time and just go really carefully over those tips of those feathers where I'm backtracking. Now for the rectangles, I decided to do a crosshatch, but I also wanted to do it a little bit different, add a little twist to it. So on the short ends of the rectangles, I'm putting in a continuous curve and then doing the crosshatch through the rest of the block. And you'll see that here in just a second. I'm using my little scalloped edge ruler to get from one point to the other, because for me it's a little bit difficult to keep that diagonal line straight unless I have a ruler to aid me. So I'm going to make two rounds in this quilting of these rectangles here. I'm doing about half of the quilting in one round, and then I'm going around the second round and doing the rest of the quilting. So here I'm cross-hatching the other direction and then putting in the continuous curve on the opposite end of that piece, and then coming to the next one and doing the continuous curve, or doing the cross-hatching and the continuous curve. So even though I am stopping to position that ruler with each piece, it really isn't taking a lot of time. It's slowing me down a little bit, but not too much. I think the entire length of time to quilt this block was less than 5 minutes. It was probably closer to 4. So it was fairly quick. Now for the corner pieces, those little yellow squares, I decided to quilt in a triangle, and I'm also using the ruler for that. And I chose to do my traveling in the ditches within the center of that block there instead of going on the outside of the block. It's a little bit faster here, and also the thread being a variegated thread and the background being black, that thread won't show up so much in the ditch. As it turns out, in other blocks I did have to travel around in the background, but that thread still didn't show that much, so it really wouldn't have mattered one way or the other. Now for the yellow star points, I chose to do a continuous curve, and of course that always goes pretty quick, but I did have to use the ruler to ditch my way from one set of star points to the next. So the whole block really did go pretty quickly. This one didn't take much time. Now when I get to the background, I will be switching thread colors. I'm going to switch to black, and I'll do the quilting in there, and that is a little bit more difficult to see on the camera here, just because of the lighting and the fact that I'm doing a tone on tone here. I'm using black thread on a black background, and that just doesn't show up as well as if I had a contrasting thread, but that was the purpose. That was done purposely. I did not want contrasting thread in the background of these 4 corner blocks in this quilt. So here I'm going to start in the corner of the block, and I chose to do an outline stitching, but it's just going in the corner, so it isn't going all the way around the piecing there, just in the corner of the block. And I'm doing I believe 3 lines of stitching here, and they're all 1/4 inch apart. So I'm using my little ruler to aid me on that, and uh, that actually went pretty quickly too. And then for the triangles, I did kind of the same thing. I did an outline stitch there, just a 1/4 inch from the piecing, and I didn't do it on the base of that triangle, just on the upper edges of the triangle, if that makes sense. And you can see that here. And then I just stitch in the ditch to get to the next section. So this block really went pretty quickly, as I said before, and I think this is a little bit of a different design than what I have used in a lot of the quilts, but that's kind of the beauty of a sampler quilt. You can do something different in each block. And then here I'll move on to the next triangle, and then I'll show you some video of the completed block. And there it is. Now my next block is the Martha Washington star block. Now this block probably gave me more trouble than any of the other block in the quilt, and that's just from my mindset. This is how my mind works. I have trouble mirror imaging things, and this block, everything is mirror image, so I was having a difficult time switching from one side of the piecing to the next, and I had to do quite a bit of ripping out of stitches to get the completed block done. And I learned from that block that when I have blocks like this, they have a lot of piecing that is mirror image, that I just need to mark out all the quilting lines to keep things going smoothly, so I don't have to stop and rip out stitches and requilt things. But on these outer star points, which is another issue I had, I started on the outside of the quilt block instead of on the inside, which may have helped me. It may not, I don't know. But anyway, I started on those outer star points and did 2 lines of quilting in there, and I chose to leave the base of the triangle open. That's the longest edge of that triangle. And then, but when I got to other sections of the block, I kind of forgot which edge I wanted to leave open, and I wind up quilting it, so I have to rip it out and start over. So you can see on that lower left-hand triangle there, that's quilted wrong. I had to go back and rip that out and fix that later. But I decided not to stop at that point and rip it out. I had to just move on and come back to it later. Now the little triangles in this block are quilted with a loop, and I did switch thread colors. For the black background, I did the black thread because this is another corner block in this quilt, and that was the choice that I had made when I chose the quilting designs and the thread for the quilting, is that I wanted those outer stars to be quilted in black in the backgrounds to not detract from the center of the quilt, because I wanted the broken star to be the showpiece in this quilt, and I didn't want the background to detract from that. Now the blocks within the broken star, in the center of the quilt, those do have the variegated thread in the background, and actually that looked fine. I think that looked it worked in this quilt, and I'll show you some of that quilting in another video. So I am just quilting in the ditch to get to my next piece, and normally I was trying to avoid quilting on the outside edge of these blocks so that the variegated thread wouldn't show so much in the piecing, but it really doesn't, and I think that's true for pretty much any of your ditch quilting, it's not going to show up if you have just like one row of stitching there. If you're overlapping 2 or 3 lines of quilting to get from one place to the other, that thread will build up and you will see that more. But if there's just one line of quilting there, it's really not going to show up that much, and it's not something you really need to worry about. But I was being a little bit picky on this quilt since this was for my daughter, and it was one of those projects that I had promised her about 4 years ago, and never got it completed. So I really was on a time schedule too. I needed to get this completed because she was getting ready to move, and I really did want to get this to her before she moved so that I didn't have to worry about it being shipped in the mail and getting lost. And I did get it done in time, and it got to her, so she now has it with her in her new home. So the quilting on this is pretty much done. It's almost done here in the center. Those orange triangles I quilted the same way as I did the outer triangles of the block in those star points. It has the 2 lines of quilting on the short edges of the triangle. And the little pink triangles and black triangles have the same quilting design. They all have loops in them. So I'm going to switch thread colors. I'm going to switch to black, and I'm going to do the quilting in the black sections. There's the loop in the small triangle, and then I'm going to do that double line of 1/4 inch stitching in the square here. And I just do one side and then go over 1/4 inch and do the next line of quilting. And this is one way to get like 2 boxes of quilting in there without having to break your thread and do the next row. So this is kind of a shortcut, and it does give it more of a modern look, and I think it just worked well in this quilt. And here the lighting is good enough that you can see some of that quilting in the black background. And it is almost completed here. And then here I'll show you some of the completed block, which I'm afraid the lighting isn't quite as good as the previous shot, but here we go with the completed block. Thanks for watching. For more quilting ideas, click on the video links. And to keep up with my newest projects, click on the subscribe button. I hope to see you again soon.